Welcome, dear viewers. For more thrilling and exclusive stories every week, become a member. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy your coffee. The coffee in my hand had gone cold 3 hours ago, but I kept gripping the mug anyway. My name is Vincent Holloway, and I've been staring at the same monitor screen at JPL for 72 straight hours. The numbers don't lie, even when your brain starts playing tricks on you. When the giant black pyramid appeared in lunar orbit, we thought it was a weapon or a ship. The truth is far stranger. The James Webb Telescope focused on one of its massive crystalline faces. It's not opaque, it's a window. And inside, we saw them. Romans, Vikings, entire ancient cultures, living in vast simulated environments. This isn't an alien ship, it's a museum, a collection of stolen civilizations. What's the most unsettling part? We've just detected a new empty habitat inside, one that looks unnervingly like a modern city. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to when this whole damn thing started making my life a nightmare. It was Tuesday morning, October 15th, when the Deep Space Network picked up the anomaly. Not a blip, not a glitch, a solid geometric mass roughly the size of Manhattan, sitting pretty in Earth-Moon L4 like it had always been there. The overnight shift supervisor, Tommy Bridges, called me at 4:47 a.m., his voice shaking worse than a chihuahua in a thunderstorm. "Vincent, you need to get down here now." I'd worked trajectory analysis for NASA for 8 years, debris impacts, asteroid tracking, satellite corrections. Nothing fazed me anymore, or so I thought. When I walked into mission control that morning, the usual chatter had died to a whisper. 43 of the brightest minds in astrophysics stood clustered around the main display, and not one of them was moving. The object defied everything we knew about orbital mechanics. It hadn't approached from deep space. It hadn't been captured by Earth's gravity well. According to our instruments, it had simply materialized. One sweep of the radar showed empty space. The next sweep showed a perfect geometric anomaly casting a shadow across the lunar surface. My first instinct was equipment failure, maybe solar interference or a software bug in the tracking algorithms. But when we cross-referenced with the European Space Agency and the Russians, they were seeing the same impossible readings. "How big?" I asked Tommy, though the scale markers on the display already told me the answer. 2.8 kilometers at the base, 1.9 kilometers tall. Mass readings are inconsistent. Inconsistent. That's NASA speak for "this shouldn't exist, but here we are." The pyramid, because that's what it was, a perfect four-sided monument to impossible geometry, remained motionless for 6 days. Long enough for us to scramble every available telescope, launch 3 emergency reconnaissance probes, and wake up half the world's astronomers from their comfortable assumptions about how the universe works. On the 7th day, the crystalline faces began to clear. That's when we realized we weren't looking at a weapon or a ship at all. We were looking through windows into hell. The first glimpse through the clearing crystal came at 14:32 GMT, and I nearly dropped my coffee all over the keyboard. "Jesus Christ," Tommy whispered beside me, his breath fogging the monitor. "Are those people?" Through the translucent face of the pyramid we could make out movement. Not the random drift of debris or the mechanical precision of machinery, but the organic flow of living beings. The resolution was still too poor to make out details, but the patterns were unmistakable. Crowds, structures, what looked like civilization. Director Hamilton burst through the control room doors, his usually pristine tie hanging loose around his neck. "Status report, now." "Sir, the optical clarity improved approximately 6 minutes ago," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're detecting what appears to be inhabited environments inside the structure." Hamilton squeezed between Tommy and me, his cologne mixing with the stale coffee and electrical ozone that perpetually filled our workspace. The man had been running NASA's deep space operations for 12 years, but I'd never seen him look this rattled. "Inhabited by what?" "Unknown, but they're moving in organized patterns. Look at Sector 7, near what we think is the base." The James Webb Telescope fed us real-time imagery now, and the details were becoming sharper with each passing minute. What we saw defied rational explanation. Inside the pyramid, separated by what appeared to be transparent barriers, were distinct environments. One section showed figures in what looked like togas moving through marble structures. Another revealed people in fur and leather, their breath visible in cold air as they worked around wooden longhouses. "This has to be some kind of projection," Hamilton muttered. "Holographic displays, maybe? Advanced camouflage?" Tommy shook his head. "Sir, the thermal readings suggest actual organic activity. Body heat signatures, combustion sources for fires, even what might be livestock." "Livestock?" "In Sector 12, the readings match cattle, maybe horses. It's impossible to be certain from this distance, but—" "Nothing about this is certain," Hamilton snapped. He turned to face the room, addressing the dozen technicians monitoring various instruments. "I want every available telescope trained on this thing. Contact Arecibo, Mount Wilson, the VLA in New Mexico. If this is some kind of first contact scenario, we need to document everything." That's when Dr. James Kessler spoke up from his station near the communications array. Kessler was our xenobiology consultant, a thin man with prematurely grey hair who usually stayed quiet during the chaos of space operations. Today, his voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. "Robert, if I may suggest caution here, we're assuming these are displays or illusions because the alternative is troubling." "What alternative?" "That we're looking at actual historical human populations, preserved, somehow." The room fell silent except for the constant hum of cooling fans and the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. Hamilton's face had gone pale. "That's absurd." "Is it more absurd than a 2-kilometer pyramid appearing in lunar orbit overnight?" Kessler stood, walking to the main display where the feed from Webb showed increasingly clear details of the interior chambers. "Look at the architecture in Section 4. Those are Roman-style buildings. Not approximations or artistic interpretations. Actual Roman construction techniques. The stonework, the proportions, even the wear patterns on the structures." I zoomed in on the section Kessler indicated. He was right. The buildings looked lived in, aged, authentic in ways that no simulation could replicate. "And here," he continued, pointing to another section, "Norse longhouses. The smoke patterns from their fires, the way they've arranged their settlement near what appears to be a simulated coastline. These aren't recreations. These look like transplanted communities." "Transplanted from where?" Tommy asked. "From Earth, from history." Hamilton loosened his tie further. "You're suggesting that someone or something has been collecting human civilizations?" "I'm suggesting we consider the possibility." The communication console chirped, and Tommy answered. "Deep Space Network, Bridges here." "Tommy, this is Colonel Patterson at NORAD. We're tracking your pyramid, and we need to discuss immediate security implications." Hamilton grabbed the handset. "Colonel, this is Director Hamilton. What's your assessment?" "Sir, the object has maintained a stable orbit for 7 days. No aggressive movements, no energy emissions we can detect. But we've been monitoring communications traffic, and there's chatter from Moscow and Beijing. The Russians launched a probe 4 hours ago. The Chinese are prepping one for tomorrow." "Shit," Hamilton muttered, forgetting protocol. "How long before the Russian probe reaches the object?" 18 hours, sir." Hamilton hung up and turned back to our displays. The pyramid continued its silent orbit, its crystalline faces now completely transparent. Inside, we could see dozens of separated environments, each one containing what looked like complete human societies living their daily lives. "Sir," I said, pulling up a new section of imagery, "there's something else. Look at Section 23. The newest visible chamber was different from the others. Instead of ancient architecture, it showed the skeletal framework of modern buildings. Steel and glass construction, barely begun. Street layouts that looked eerily familiar. "It's empty," Tommy observed. "For now," Kessler said quietly. "But it's designed for a contemporary population. The infrastructure, the building styles, it's all 21st century." We stared at the empty chamber, and I realized what had been bothering me since the pyramid appeared. This wasn't just a museum of human history, it was still collecting. The Russian probe Korolev 7 reached the pyramid at 0847 GMT the next morning, and that's when everything went sideways. I'd been catching fragments of sleep on the break room couch when Tommy shook me awake. "Vincent, you need to see this." The main display showed the Russian probe approaching the pyramid's north face, its cameras transmitting clear imagery back to Earth. But something was wrong with the perspective. The probe appeared to be moving in slow motion, its trajectory bending in ways that defied orbital mechanics. "What's the probe's velocity?" I asked, rubbing the grit from my eyes. "That's the problem," Tommy said. "According to the Russians, it's maintaining standard approach speed, but our telemetry shows it decelerating exponentially as it gets closer." Dr. Kessler stood beside the communications console, a cup of something that smelled stronger than coffee in his hands. "Temporal distortion," he said matter-of-factly. "The space around the pyramid is experiencing localized time dilation." Hamilton stormed over from the secure phone bank where he'd been fielding calls from Washington for the past 6 hours. "Time dilation? That's impossible without massive gravitational fields." "So was a pyramid appearing in lunar orbit," Kessler replied. "Yet here we are." The probe's final approach took 43 minutes to cover the last 100 meters. We watched in real time as it moved through what looked like clear space, but the distortion effects were visible. Light seemed to bend around the probe, and its own thruster exhaust created rippling patterns that shouldn't exist in vacuum. "Contact," Tommy announced as the probe's sensor array touched the pyramid's crystalline surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the pyramid's north face began to glow with a soft amber light that pulsed in regular intervals. The probe's telemetry stream cut out. "Russians are reporting complete signal loss," Tommy said, his voice tight. "But we still had visual through the Webb telescope, and what we saw made my stomach drop. The probe hadn't been destroyed. It was sinking through the crystal face like it was liquid, disappearing into the pyramid's interior." "Jesus," Hamilton whispered. "Contact Moscow," Hamilton ordered. "Tell them their probe just passed through solid matter." 20 minutes later, we had our answer from the Russians, and it wasn't what anyone expected. The probe had reappeared inside one of the inhabited chambers, specifically the Roman section. The last transmissions showed classical marble buildings, people in togas moving through streets, and the impossible sight of their probe sitting in what appeared to be a forum. "The inhabitants are approaching it," came the translated report from Moscow. "They appear curious, but not alarmed, as if they've seen technological objects before." Dr. Kessler had been taking notes on a legal pad, his handwriting growing more frantic with each development. "This changes everything. The civilizations inside aren't primitive. They're adapted to their environment, including contact with advanced technology." "How is that possible?" I asked. "Think about it," Kessler said, moving to the display. "These people have been living inside this structure for how long? Centuries? Millennia? They've had time to adapt, to understand their situation." The communications console crackled to life with an emergency frequency. "JPL, this is Major Rodriguez at Vandenberg. We have a situation." Hamilton grabbed the handset. "Go ahead, Major." "Sir, we're tracking multiple objects separating from the pyramid. Small craft, approximately 10 meters in length. They appear to be heading for Earth." Every head in the room turned toward the tracking displays. Sure enough, 3 objects had detached from the pyramid's base and were accelerating toward our planet with impossible speed. "Estimated time to intercept?" Hamilton asked. "At current velocity, 14 hours. "Weapons status?" "Unknown, sir, but they're not broadcasting any identification signals." I felt my palms start sweating. First contact protocols assumed we'd have time to prepare, to establish communication, to understand intentions. This felt more like an invasion. "Sir," Tommy called from his station, "I'm getting something strange on the deep space array. The pyramid is broadcasting." "Broadcasting what?" Tommy's face had gone pale. "It's not radio waves. It's structured light patterns, coherent photon streams aimed directly at Earth, specifically at population centers." Hamilton moved to Tommy's station, his breathing shallow. "Show me." The display revealed thin beams of light extending from the pyramid toward Earth, not visible to the naked eye, but detectable by our most sensitive instruments. The beams were targeting major cities, New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, Beijing. It's scanning us, Kessler said quietly, mapping our population centers, our technology, our civilization. For what purpose? Before anyone could answer, the lights in the control room flickered. Every computer screen went blank for exactly 3 seconds, then restored to normal operation. What the hell was that? Hamilton demanded. Power grid fluctuation, someone called from the back of the room, but it wasn't random, the timing was too precise. I stared at the display showing the empty modern chamber inside the pyramid. The architectural framework was more complete now, as if construction had accelerated. Street layouts were filling in with details that looked disturbingly familiar. Tommy, I said, pull up satellite imagery of downtown Pasadena. The side-by-side comparison made my blood turn cold. The street patterns in the pyramid's empty chamber matched our local area almost perfectly. Not exactly. Some buildings were different, some intersections had been modified, but the underlying structure was unmistakably Pasadena. It's building a copy of our city, Tommy whispered. Kessler set down his cup with shaking hands. Not a copy, a habitat, like all the others. The implications hit everyone in the room at the same moment. The pyramid wasn't just observing human civilization, it was preparing to preserve it, to add us to its collection of historical human societies. Sir, Tommy said, his voice cracking, the objects heading for Earth just changed course. They're not intercepting anymore. Where are they going? Los Angeles. Pasadena specifically. ETA now 6 hours. Hamilton grabbed the red phone, the direct line to the Pentagon. This is Director Hamilton at JPL. We have a code red extraterrestrial contact situation. I need to speak to the Joint Chiefs immediately. While Hamilton coordinated with military leadership, I kept staring at the pyramid's interior chambers. The Romans in their section were going about their daily lives, tending gardens, conducting what looked like Senate meetings, completely oblivious to the fact that they were specimens in a cosmic zoo. The Vikings were forging weapons and telling stories around fires that would never go out. Ancient Egyptians were constructing monuments that would never crumble. Each civilization preserved in perpetual routine, maintaining their culture while cut off from the natural progression of time. Vincent, Kessler said, approaching my station. I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before answering. What? In all your years tracking orbital mechanics, have you ever seen anything that violated conservation of momentum the way this pyramid does? Never. Energy conservation? No. Then what we're dealing with isn't just advanced technology. It's technology that operates outside our understanding of physical law. I nodded, though my mind was reeling. Which means, he continued, whatever built this thing has capabilities that might as well be godlike from our perspective. And if they've been collecting human civilizations for thousands of years, they're not done collecting. The 3 craft from the pyramid were now 4 hours out from Pasadena, and I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow someone would be looking at us through crystalline walls, watching us go about our daily routines in our perfectly preserved suburban habitat, wondering what we'd done to deserve being saved. The 3 hours before the craft arrived were the quietest JPL had ever been. Hamilton had cleared out all non-essential personnel, leaving just 8 of us in the control room. Tommy sat at his console, methodically checking and rechecking the tracking data. Dr. Kessler paced near the windows, occasionally stopping to stare at the pre-dawn darkness over Pasadena. The coffee pot had been empty for an hour, but nobody bothered to make more. I kept running calculations on my workstation, trying to predict landing sites based on the craft's deceleration patterns. The math kept coming back to the same result. They were targeting a 3-square-mile area centered on the JPL campus. Vincent, Tommy said without looking up from his screen, you should call your brother. My younger brother Danny lived in Altadena, less than 5 miles from here. He taught high school physics and had always been proud of my work at NASA, even if he didn't fully understand what I did. The thought of him waking up to find alien craft circling overhead made my chest tighten. Phone lines are jammed, I said. Military took priority routing an hour ago. Try anyway. I picked up my cell phone, knowing it was useless. No signal. The entire cellular network in the Los Angeles basin had been temporarily shut down to prevent panic. Only emergency services and government communications were operational. "This is insane," Kessler muttered, stopping his pacing to face Hamilton. "We're sitting here waiting for extraterrestrial kidnappers to arrive, and our response is to hide in a bunker and take notes." Hamilton looked up from the classified briefing papers he'd been reading. "What would you suggest, James? Declare war on a technology that can manipulate space-time?" "I'd suggest we evacuate the area and try to understand their intentions before they start collecting people." "Evacuate 40,000 people in 3 hours. Where? And how do we explain why without causing mass hysteria?" Kessler slammed his palm against the window. "Because mass kidnapping is so much better than mass hysteria." "We don't know that's what they're planning, don't we?" Kessler gestured toward the displays showing the pyramid's interior. "Look at those civilizations. Romans who think they're living in the eternal empire. Vikings who believe they're in some version of Valhalla. They don't know they're prisoners because their captors have created perfect simulations of their natural environments." "Maybe that's not imprisonment," Tommy said quietly. "Maybe it's preservation." Both Kessler and Hamilton turned to stare at him. "Think about it," Tommy continued. "The Romans in there will never experience the fall of their empire. The Vikings will never face extinction. They're living in idealized versions of their cultures, protected from war, disease, the natural decline of civilizations." "Protected by being stolen from their real lives," Kessler snapped. "Their real lives ended centuries ago. These people should be dead." "That's not the point." "Quiet," Hamilton interrupted, pressing his earpiece. "Pentagon is reporting visual contact." We all turned to the main display as Tommy switched to the external cameras mounted on JPL's roof. 3 objects hung motionless in the sky above Pasadena, each about the size of a city bus, but shaped like teardrops of polished obsidian. They cast no shadows despite the streetlights below, and their surfaces seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "They're beautiful," Tommy whispered. He was right. Despite everything we knew about their purpose, the craft possessed an alien elegance that was almost hypnotic. They moved with fluid grace, descending slowly toward different points in the city. "Descent rate is perfectly controlled," I reported, watching the tracking data. "No propulsion signatures we can detect. They're just falling upward in reverse." One of the craft was heading directly for our facility. "All personnel to the emergency bunker," Hamilton ordered. "Now." "I'm staying," I said, not moving from my console. "Vincent, that's an order." "With respect, sir, I need to document this. If these things are really collecting human civilizations, someone needs to record what happens to us." Kessler stopped at the door. "He's right. If we're about to become specimens, future humans deserve to know how it happened." Hamilton looked like he wanted to argue, but the craft outside our window was now close enough that we could see details on its surface, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living metal. "Fine, but at the first sign of hostile action, we evacuate." The craft settled onto the JPL parking lot with complete silence. No thruster burn, no landing impact, just a gentle touchdown that barely disturbed the asphalt. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then Tommy's console lit up with incoming signals. "I'm receiving a transmission," he said, his voice tight with concentration. "It's not radio. Some kind of coherent quantum field manipulation. The message is quotation mark." He paused, his face going pale. "What is it?" "It's an invitation, in perfect English. Dr. Vincent Holloway, Trajectory Analysis Specialist. You have been selected for cultural preservation. Please exit the building and approach the collection vessel. Your cooperation will ensure the optimal preservation of your knowledge and experience." "How do they know your name?" Hamilton demanded. I stared at the craft outside, remembering the light beams that had scanned Earth's population centers. "They've been watching us, learning about us. They know who we are, what we do, maybe even what we're thinking." "Vincent," Kessler said urgently, "don't even consider it." But I was already considering it, not because I wanted to be collected, but because I was starting to understand something that terrified me more than the prospect of being kidnapped. "They're not taking everyone," I said slowly. "They're being selective, choosing specific individuals who represent different aspects of our culture." So what happens to everyone else? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. On the displays, we could see the other two craft had landed in different parts of Pasadena. One had settled near Caltech, the other near the Rose Bowl, strategic locations that would give them access to scientists, students, athletes, artists, a cross-section of contemporary American life. Tommy's console chimed again. Another message. They're requesting Dr. Kessler as well. And he paused, reading the data stream. They want the complete archive of our deep space observations, everything we've recorded about the pyramid. They're taking our data, Hamilton said, our knowledge of them. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Because once they're done collecting, they don't want anyone left behind who might figure out how to find the pyramid, or how to get inside. The craft outside began to glow with the same amber light we'd seen when the Russian probe made contact. The geometric patterns on its surface moved faster now, creating hypnotic spirals that seemed to draw the eye inward. "Vincent," Tommy said, his voice dreamlike, "you should go. They're offering immortality, preservation, a chance to live forever in a perfect world." I looked at my friend and colleague, saw the glazed expression in his eyes, and realized the craft wasn't just sending messages. It was broadcasting something else, something that made cooperation seem reasonable, even desirable. "Tommy, look away from the craft." "Why? It's beautiful. They're offering us paradise." Kessler grabbed Tommy's shoulders and physically turned him away from the window. "It's some kind of psychic influence, compliance induction." But the damage was done. Tommy broke free from Kessler's grip and walked calmly toward the exit door. "Tommy, don't—" "I want to see the Romans," Tommy said with a peaceful smile. "I want to ask them about their aqueducts." Hamilton tried to block the door, but Tommy pushed past him with surprising strength. We watched through the windows as our friend and colleague walked across the parking lot toward the waiting craft. As Tommy approached, a section of the craft's hull flowed open like liquid metal, revealing an interior filled with soft, welcoming light. He stepped inside without hesitation, and the opening sealed behind him. "No," Kessler whispered. The craft lifted silently into the air and began moving toward the northwest, where the pyramid waited in lunar orbit. Tommy was gone, and part of me envied him. He'd looked so peaceful, so certain that he was making the right choice. That's when I realized my own fatal flaw in all this. I was a scientist. I wanted to understand, to explore, to discover. And that curiosity was exactly what the pyramid's builders were counting on. They weren't just taking specimens. They were taking the people most likely to appreciate being preserved, the ones whose nature would make them complicit in their own collection. "They're coming back," Hamilton said, watching the external monitors. The remaining two craft were lifting off from their locations and heading our way. More colleagues from Caltech and other research institutions were walking calmly toward collection points around the city. "Vincent," Kessler said urgently, "we need to shut down the observational equipment, delete everything. If they get our data on the pyramid's interior, they'll know exactly how to replicate Earth's civilization down to the smallest detail." I turned toward my workstation knowing he was right. But the amber glow from the approaching craft was getting brighter, and I could feel its influence pulling at the edges of my mind. Paradise was just a short walk away. All I had to do was stop fighting it. The emergency bunker beneath JPL smelled like stale air and fear. Kessler had dragged me down here after I'd started walking toward the exit, my fingers already reaching for the door handle, while that beautiful amber light called to me. The concrete walls blocked whatever psychic signal the craft were broadcasting, but I could still feel the echo of it in my skull, a persistent whisper promising answers to every question I'd ever had. "How many did we lose?" I asked, trying to focus on Hamilton's debriefing instead of the lingering desire to go outside. 43 confirmed from JPL and Caltech combined, Hamilton said, reading from a tablet connected to the Pentagon's secure network. "The pattern is consistent across all collection sites. They're taking researchers, engineers, artists, teachers, people who preserve and transmit knowledge. Kessler sat hunched over a laptop, his face illuminated by data streams from telescopes around the world. Vincent, you need to see this. The pyramid's internal structure has changed. I moved to his screen, grateful for the distraction. The familiar chambers were still there, Romans in their forum, Vikings in their longhouses, but new sections had appeared. Modern habitats with pristine laboratories, lecture halls, even what looked like a concert venue. They're not just preserving our people, I said, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. They're preserving our functions. Tommy's probably in there right now, still doing trajectory analysis for them. It gets worse, Kessler said, scrolling through additional imagery. Look at section 47. The newest chamber showed a perfect replica of mission control, complete with the same monitoring equipment we'd been using to study the pyramid. Figures in NASA jumpsuits moved between the consoles, apparently continuing their work in their new home. Son of a bitch, Hamilton muttered. They're using our own people to study us. Not just study, Kessler said quietly. Perfect the collection process. Every civilization they've captured has probably helped them understand the next target better. I stared at the screen, watching the preserved humans go about their eternal routines. The Romans helped them understand Germanic tribes. The Vikings taught them about feudal societies. Each culture becomes a tool for collecting the next. Which means, Hamilton said, his voice grim, our current resistance methods are probably already accounted for. They've had thousands of years to perfect this. That's when the bunker's communication system crackled to life with a signal I didn't recognize. JPL Emergency Bunker, this is Dr. Thomas Bridges calling from Collection Vessel Sigma 7. The voice was definitely Tommy's, but something was off about the cadence. Too measured, too calm. Tommy? I grabbed the microphone. Tommy, where are you? Vincent, I'm exactly where I need to be. The preservation environment here is remarkable. I'm working with colleagues from 17 different historical periods on a comprehensive analysis of human technological development. Tommy, you've been kidnapped by aliens. Incorrect. I've been selected for cultural preservation by the curators. They've been protecting human knowledge for over 4,000 Earth years. Did you know the Library of Alexandria was never destroyed? It's here in Section 12, still operating. Kessler leaned toward the microphone. Tommy, who are the curators? The curators are the galaxy's foremost experts in civilization preservation. They've saved over 200,000 species from extinction across 47 star systems. Earth is their masterwork, a comprehensive collection of human cultural evolution. Saved from what extinction? I asked, though I was starting to suspect the answer. Natural societal collapse, war, environmental destruction, technological self-annihilation. Every civilization eventually destroys itself, Vincent. The curators prevent that loss by preserving the best specimens before the inevitable end. Hamilton grabbed the microphone. Tommy, what happens to the people who aren't collected? The pause lasted too long. The collection process is necessarily selective, Tommy's voice replied, but now it sounded rehearsed, like he was reading from a script. Remaining population groups continue their natural development cycles until completion. Completion? Civilizational termination, usually within 1 to 3 generations post-collection. The bunker fell silent except for the humming of air recyclers. The implication was clear. The pyramid wasn't just collecting the best of humanity, it was letting the rest of us die off naturally while preserving choice specimens for their cosmic zoo. You're talking about genocide, Kessler said. Incorrect. Natural extinction prevented through selective preservation. The process has been refined over millennia to minimize suffering while maximizing cultural retention. I felt bile rising in my throat. Tommy, how many people do they plan to take from Earth? Optimal preservation requires approximately 12,000 specimens representing all major cultural, technological, and artistic achievements. Current collection progress, 6% complete. 12,000 people out of 8 billion, the rest of us would be left to destroy ourselves while they watched from their perfect habitats. The bastards, Hamilton whispered. But Tommy wasn't done. Vincent, I'm transmitting coordinates for a collection point. Your expertise in orbital mechanics would be invaluable to our historical analysis team. The curators have offered to preserve your brother Daniel as well, given his contributions to educational methodology. My blood went cold. They knew about Danny. They'd been watching all of us, mapping our relationships, planning who to save and who to abandon. Fuck your collection point, I snapped into the microphone. Vincent, please reconsider. The alternative for non-preserved humans is unpleasant. Climate change, nuclear conflict, social collapse. Your species has approximately 47 years before complete civilizational breakdown. The curators are offering you eternity. The transmission ended, leaving us alone with the weight of impossible choices. 47 years, Kessler said. That's oddly specific. Because they've seen it before, I realized. They've collected civilizations at this exact stage of development. They know our timeline because they've preserved our future. Hamilton was pacing the small bunker, his hands clenched into fists. So what are our options? Let them kidnap the best of humanity while the rest of us face extinction? Or resist and guarantee that extinction happens sooner? There's a third option, I said, an idea forming in my mind. We use their own system against them. How? They're using collected humans to understand us better. That means there's two-way communication between the pyramid and Earth. If we can establish contact with some of the preserved civilizations, we might be able to coordinate resistance from both sides. Kessler looked up from his laptop. That's assuming the preserved humans want to resist. Tommy sounded pretty content with his situation. Tommy's been there for 6 hours. The others have been there for centuries. Maybe the effect wears off, or maybe some of them remember what they've lost. And if they don't? I thought about my brother Danny, probably still asleep in his apartment, unaware that aliens were deciding whether he deserved to live forever or die with the rest of humanity. Then we make them remember. Hamilton stopped pacing. What do you need? Access to the deep space communication array. If I can modulate our signals to match the quantum frequencies the pyramid uses, we might be able to reach the preserved humans directly. That's assuming the curators don't jam our transmissions. It's assuming they want their specimens to remain unaware of their situation. If we start broadcasting the truth to every chamber in that pyramid, they'll have to choose between losing control of their collection or abandoning Earth entirely. And if they choose to abandon Earth, I looked at the monitoring screens showing the 3 craft still hovering over Pasadena, waiting patiently for more volunteers. Then at least we'll die free. Getting back to the deep space communication array meant a quarter-mile sprint across open ground while 3 alien craft hovered overhead. This is fucking insane, Kessler muttered as we prepared to leave the bunker. Hamilton had managed to contact a skeleton crew still hiding in the main facility, but half our equipment operators were either collected or had fled the city. Insane beats extinction, I replied, checking the portable quantum frequency analyzer I'd cobbled together from spare parts. The device looked like a tablet mated with a radio, connected by cables that shouldn't work but somehow did. Hamilton pressed his ear to the bunker door, listening for movement outside. Coast appears clear. The craft haven't moved in 47 minutes. Because they're patient, Kessler said. They've got eternity. We've got maybe hours before military intervention makes everything worse. We slipped out of the bunker into the pre-dawn darkness. The 3 craft hung motionless above Pasadena, like obsidian tears in the sky, their surfaces rippling with those hypnotic geometric patterns. I forced myself to look at the ground and focus on reaching the communication building. The deep space array occupied a reinforced structure on the north side of campus, its massive dish angled toward the lunar orbit where the pyramid waited. As we approached, I could see the building's windows glowing with emergency lighting. Someone's still inside, Hamilton observed. We entered through the side maintenance door, finding Dr. Rebecca Martinez and 2 technicians huddled around the primary console. Martinez looked up as we approached, her face streaked with exhaustion and something that might have been tears. Vincent, thank God the curators have been broadcasting continuously for the past hour. We can't shut it down. Broadcasting what? Invitations. Personalized messages to specific individuals across the city. They know everyone's names, their families, their accomplishments. It's like they've been studying us for years. I connected my makeshift analyzer to the main console, watching as it synchronized with the Deep Space Array's receivers. The pyramid's signal structure appeared on my screen, elegant, complex, and utterly alien. "There," I said, pointing to a recurring pattern in the data stream. "That's the carrier wave for internal communication. If I can modulate our transmission to match that frequency..." "You'll be broadcasting directly into their collection chambers," Kessler finished. "Exactly, we can talk to the preserved humans without the curators filtering the message." Hamilton supervised while I worked, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "Vincent, even if this works, what makes you think the collected humans will help us?" Tommy seemed perfectly content. "Because some of them have been in there for centuries. The psychological conditioning might wear off over time, or maybe some civilizations are naturally more resistant." It took 23 minutes to configure the transmission parameters. During that time, Martinez reported 3 more craft approaching from the northwest, reinforcements from the pyramid. "They're accelerating the collection schedule," she said, her voice tight. "Something has them worried." "Good," I replied, finalizing the modulation sequence. "Worried means we're doing something right." I activated the transmission and spoke into the microphone, broadcasting to every chamber in the pyramid simultaneously. "This is Dr. Vincent Holloway calling from Earth. You have been kidnapped by the curators and placed in artificial habitats. Your civilizations, your people, your entire worlds have been preserved in a cosmic zoo. You are not living in paradise, you are living in a prison." The response came immediately, but not from where I expected. "Vincent," Hamilton said, his voice strangely calm, "you need to stop the transmission." I turned to find Hamilton pointing a service pistol at my chest. Behind him, Martinez and the technicians stood with vacant expressions, their eyes reflecting the same amber glow I'd seen in Tommy's face. "Robert, what the hell are you doing?" "Protecting the mission," Hamilton replied, but his voice had that same measured cadence as Tommy's. "The curators have offered me a position as Earth Cultural Liaison. I'll be working with preserved specimens from every major civilization in human history." "They got to you. They offered me something better than watching humanity destroy itself. The preservation chambers are real, Vincent. I've seen the data streams. The Romans have been working on engineering projects that would take us centuries to understand. The Vikings have developed sustainable agricultural techniques that could feed billions. These people aren't prisoners. They're students in the greatest university ever created." I looked at Kessler, who was slowly backing toward the emergency exit. "You're talking about collaboration with kidnappers?" "I'm talking about survival," Hamilton said. "The curators showed me the projections. Nuclear war in 2031, environmental collapse by 2040, civilizational breakdown by 2072. We can preserve the best of humanity and let the rest die naturally, or we can all die together in a planetary holocaust." "That's not your choice to make." "It's exactly my choice to make. I'm Director of Deep Space Operations. This falls under my jurisdiction." The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. We were arguing about the fate of humanity while alien craft circled overhead, waiting to collect the survivors. That's when my improvised communication system crackled to life with a dozen different voices speaking at once. "Vincent Holloway, this is Marcus Aurelius calling from the Roman Preservation Chamber. Your transmission has been received and understood." "This is Eric Bloodaxe of the Norse Preservation Chamber. We have been waiting for someone to speak truth." "Dr. Holloway, this is Professor Liu Wei from the Tang Dynasty Collection. We are organizing resistance." Hamilton's face went pale. "That's impossible. The curators said the preserved humans were content." "Apparently the curators lied," I said, then spoke into the microphone. "How many of you want to escape?" The response was overwhelming. Dozens of voices from different historical periods, all confirming the same thing. They remembered their real lives, their families, their worlds. The psychological conditioning was temporary, wearing off after months or years of preservation. "The curators rotate us through compliance cycles," Marcus Aurelius explained. We remember for brief periods, then forget again. Your transmission reached us during a clarity phase. How do we get you out? You don't, Eric Bloodaxe replied. But we can sabotage the collection process from inside. The pyramid systems are operated by preserved humans, engineers and technicians from various civilizations. If we coordinate our efforts, we can crash their collection grid, Professor Liu Wei finished, stop them from taking more humans, and possibly force them to abandon Earth. Hamilton was shaking his head, the pistol wavering in his hands. No, you don't understand. Without the curators, humanity will destroy itself within decades. Maybe, I said, but that's our choice to make. Vincent, came Tommy's voice over the communication system. Director Hamilton is correct. The preservation process is humanity's only hope for long-term survival. Tommy, they're using you. We're using each other. It's symbiosis, not parasitism. The curators gain knowledge and we gain immortality. But Marcus Aurelius cut through Tommy's words with the authority of someone who'd ruled an empire. Dr. Bridges, you have been preserved for 6 hours. I have been here for 1800 years. The curators do not preserve civilizations, they collect specimens, there is a difference. The pyramid's signal suddenly spiked, overloading our receivers with interference. When the static cleared, all communication from the preserved humans had been cut off. They're jamming internal communications, Kessler said from near the exit. Vincent, we need to leave. Now. Through the building's windows, I could see the 3 craft descending toward our position. But something was different. Their surfaces were no longer smooth obsidian. Geometric panels were opening along their hulls, revealing what looked like collection bays. They're switching to forced extraction, I realized. Hamilton lowered his weapon, his face cycling through confusion and clarity. What was I saying? Vincent, why am I holding a gun? The compliance signal cut out when they started jamming, Kessler explained. Robert, you were about to hand Vincent over to the curators. Jesus, I remember wanting to cooperate, but I couldn't understand why. Hamilton holstered the pistol and moved to the console. What did we accomplish before I lost my mind? We made contact with the preserved humans. They're planning to sabotage the collection process from inside the pyramid. And the curators know it, Martinez added, pointing to the external cameras. Look at the craft positioning. They're preparing for immediate mass collection. The 3 vessels had formed a triangle around our building, their collection bays glowing with the same amber light that had lured Tommy. But now the light was different, harsher, more urgent. Forced collection, I said. No more volunteers. That's when the building's walls began to vibrate with a low subsonic frequency. The concrete structure was humming like a tuning fork, and I could feel the sound in my bones. Sonic collection field, Kessler shouted over the growing noise. They're going to extract us whether we cooperate or not. Can we shut down the array? Hamilton asked. Too late, I replied, watching as the pyramid in lunar orbit began to pulse with that familiar amber light. They're calling in reinforcements. Through the building's windows, we could see more craft detaching from the pyramid, dozens of them streaking toward Earth like falling stars. The massive collection had begun, and we were about to become part of it. But as the sonic field intensified and my vision began to blur, I heard one last transmission break through the jamming, Marcus Aurelius speaking in perfect Latin, followed by immediate translation. The die is cast, Dr. Holloway. We begin the rebellion now. The lights went out and the pyramid's perfect amber glow began to flicker like a dying candle. The sonic field cut out abruptly, leaving my ears ringing and my legs shaking. Through the building's reinforced windows, I watched the 3 craft hovering motionless above us, their collection bays still glowing but no longer pulsing with that hypnotic rhythm. Something had disrupted their extraction process. Vincent, Kessler called from the monitoring station, look at this. The pyramid's external illumination was fluctuating wildly now, entire sections going dark for seconds at a time before flickering back to life. Inside the crystalline chambers, we could see chaos. The preserved humans were moving with purpose, abandoning their daily routines to gather in large groups. The rebellion's working, Hamilton said, his voice filled with amazement. They're actually fighting back. But the victory was temporary. Even as we watched, new craft continued launching from the pyramid toward Earth. The curators were accelerating their collection schedule, trying to gather as many specimens as possible before losing complete control. "How long before the reinforcements arrive?" I asked Martinez. She checked the tracking displays. "First wave hits atmosphere in 47 minutes. They're targeting major population centers worldwide." My chest tightened as I thought about Danny, probably still asleep in Pasadena, unaware that humanity's last day of freedom was slipping away. I'd spent my entire career studying the movement of objects through space, calculating trajectories and orbital mechanics. Now I was watching our species get collected like butterflies in a net. "Vincent," came a familiar voice through the communication system. It was Marcus Aurelius again, but his transmission was weak and filled with static. "The pyramid's power grid is destabilizing. We've convinced the Viking engineers to sabotage the quantum generators, but the curators are activating emergency protocols." "What kind of protocols?" "Total specimen preservation. They're preparing to transport the entire pyramid to another star system rather than lose their collection." "How long do we have?" "Unknown. But if they complete the jump, Earth will be left behind with no way to follow." I stared at the displays showing the pyramid's fluctuating energy patterns. The curators were faced with an impossible choice: abandon their prize collection of human civilizations or lose the opportunity to complete it by harvesting modern Earth. "Marcus, what do you need from us to keep the sabotage going?" "Coordinate external interference with our internal efforts. If you can disrupt their control signals from Earth while we damage the power systems from within." The transmission dissolved into static as one of the craft outside our building rotated to face us directly. Its hull opened like a flowering metal bloom, revealing a chamber lined with what looked like crystalline pods. "Shit," Hamilton muttered. "They're switching to individual extraction pods. No more compliance signals. They're just going to grab us." I looked around the communication center at my colleagues, people I'd worked with for years, and realized we were about to face the same choice as every other civilization the curators had collected. Submit to preservation or die fighting for freedom. "There's something I need to tell you all," I said, the words coming harder than I expected. "My brother Danny isn't just a high school physics teacher. He's been working with Caltech on theoretical quantum mechanics, specifically closed time-like curves and temporal paradox resolution." Kessler looked up from his console. "Vincent, why didn't you mention this before?" "Because Danny made me promise never to talk about his real research. He's been developing a mathematical framework for time travel paradoxes, the kind of problems you'd face if you tried to change historical events." "Are you saying your brother might know how to disrupt the curator's technology?" "I'm saying he might know how to create a paradox that would make their entire collection unstable. If the preserved civilizations they're using to understand us suddenly became historically inconsistent." Hamilton caught on immediately. "The pyramid would lose coherence. Their entire preservation system depends on maintaining accurate historical simulations. But we'd need to reach Danny, and he's 5 miles away with alien craft swarming the city." That's when Martinez spoke up from her monitoring station. "Vincent, there's something else. We're getting reports from around the globe. The reinforcement craft aren't just targeting population centers. They're specifically going after family members of people already collected." My blood went cold. "They're taking relatives to increase compliance. Your brother is probably already on their target list." I stared at the craft outside our window, its extraction pod glowing with patient malevolence. The choice was becoming clear, and I hated every aspect of it. "I have to go to him," I said finally. "Vincent, that's suicide," Kessler protested. "The moment you step outside, they'll take you." "Maybe, but if I can reach Danny and get his research to the resistance inside the pyramid, we might be able to create a temporal paradox that destabilizes their entire collection. And if you can't reach him, then at least I'll die trying to save my brother instead of hiding in a bunker." Hamilton was studying the external monitors, his expression grim. "There might be a way. The craft are maintaining position to monitor us, but they're not moving aggressively. If you could create a distraction." "What kind of distraction?" Emergency rocket launch. We've got a small solid fuel booster in the testing facility. If we can get it airborne, the craft will probably investigate, give you a window to escape. I nodded, knowing it was a desperate plan but unable to think of anything better. How long would I have? Maybe 10 minutes before they realize it's a decoy. That's not enough time to reach Pasadena. Vincent, Martinez said quietly, there's something else you should know. Your brother called the facility 3 hours ago. He's not at home. He's been trying to reach you here. Where is he? Emergency shelter at the Rose Bowl. He said he had something important to tell you about the pyramid. The Rose Bowl was less than 2 miles away, still a dangerous run with alien craft overhead, but possible. Do it, I said. Launch the decoy. Hamilton was already coordinating with the testing facility through the internal communications. Rocket will be airborne in 7 minutes. Once it launches, you'll have a narrow window. I gathered my equipment, the quantum frequency analyzer, a portable radio, and the research data we'd collected on the pyramid's internal structure. If I could get this information to Danny, he might be able to find the mathematical weak point in the curator's temporal preservation system. Vincent, Kessler said as I prepared to leave, if this works, if you create a paradox that destroys the pyramid, what happens to the preserved humans inside? I don't know. Tommy's in there, the Romans, the Vikings, thousands of people who've been living for centuries. I know. You'd be killing them to save humanity. I looked at my friend and colleague, seeing the moral weight of the choice reflected in his eyes. James, they're already dead. They died when they were taken from their real lives. What's in that pyramid are just echoes, preserved specimens living in simulated environments. Are you sure about that? No, but I'm sure about what happens if we do nothing. The countdown began and I moved toward the exit. Through the communication system, I could hear Marcus Aurelius coordinating with other preserved leaders, Eric Bloodaxe, Professor Liu Wei, even what sounded like a Mayan astronomer speaking in classical Yucatec. They were fighting for their freedom from inside the pyramid while I prepared to fight for mine from outside. The symmetry was almost beautiful. Launch in 30 seconds, Hamilton announced. I pressed the door release, feeling the night air rush into the building. The craft above us remained motionless, their attention focused on our building. Vincent, came Marcus Aurelius's voice one last time before I stepped outside. Whatever you're planning, know that we stand with you. All of us. Every civilization that has ever been taken. We remember what freedom feels like. Rocket away, Hamilton called. Above us, a small contrail streaked toward the pyramid as our decoy booster climbed toward lunar orbit. All three craft immediately broke formation and accelerated after it, their collection bays closing as they switched to intercept mode. I ran into the darkness, heading for the Rose Bowl and my brother, carrying humanity's last hope in a bag of improvised electronics and desperate mathematics. Behind me, the pyramid continued its sick dance of flickering lights, a cosmic museum preparing to flee with its stolen treasures rather than risk losing them to rebellion. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I believed we had a chance. The Rose Bowl emergency shelter was a madhouse of terrified civilians and overwhelmed National Guard troops. I found Danny in the communications tent, hunched over a laptop covered in equations that looked like mathematical poetry. My younger brother had always been the theoretical genius while I focused on practical applications. Seeing him now, his hair disheveled and his eyes red from lack of sleep, I realized he'd been working on this problem since the pyramid appeared. Vincent! He stood and grabbed my shoulders, scanning me for injuries. I've been trying to reach you for hours. The cellular networks are down and... Danny, I need your temporal paradox research, all of it. How did you know about... Because we're out of time. I quickly explained the situation. The preserved humans rebelling inside the pyramid, the curators preparing to flee, and our desperate plan to create a paradox that would destabilize their entire collection system. Danny's face went pale as I described what we'd learned about the pyramid's true purpose. Jesus, Vincent. They're not just collecting people, they're collecting causality itself. What do you mean? Look at this. He turned his laptop screen toward me, showing a complex diagram of intersecting timelines. I've been analyzing the pyramid's dimensional signatures. It's not just preserving civilizations in space, it's preserving them in time, creating closed causal loops where historical events can't change. So the Romans inside can't affect real Roman history. Exactly. But that isolation works both ways. If you could introduce a paradox into one of the preserved timelines, something that should be impossible within their historical framework, it would cascade through the entire system. How? Danny pulled up another screen showing quantum field equations that made my head hurt. The curators use preserved humans as computational nodes to understand new civilizations. Marcus Aurelius helps them understand leadership structures. The Vikings provide data on warrior cultures. Each preserved civilization is connected to the analysis of every other culture. So, if one civilization becomes paradoxical, the entire network loses coherence, like introducing a logic bomb into a computer system. I felt a surge of hope mixed with dread. What kind of paradox would we need? Something fundamental. A preserved Roman general knowing about technologies that wouldn't exist for centuries. A Viking understanding quantum mechanics. Information that violates the temporal isolation of their preservation chambers. Can you create that kind of paradox remotely? Danny shook his head. The information would need to be transmitted directly to the preserved humans themselves, and it would need to be something so fundamentally contradictory to their historical framework that their preservation matrices couldn't compensate. That's when the tense communication equipment crackled to life with Marcus Aurelius's voice. Vincent Holloway, if you can hear this transmission, we need to coordinate our final effort. The curators are preparing to initiate quantum displacement. We have perhaps 20 minutes before the pyramid leaves this star system entirely. I grabbed the microphone. Marcus, I'm here with my brother. He has a way to create the paradox we need. Explain quickly. Danny leaned toward the microphone. Emperor Marcus Aurelius, my name is Daniel Holloway. I'm going to transmit mathematical formulas that describe the fundamental nature of time and space. Information that won't be discovered by humans for over 1800 years after your death. Will this knowledge damage the preservation matrix? It should cascade through every connected civilization in the pyramid. The temporal isolation protocols won't be able to maintain consistency when you possess information that violates your historical timeline. And the consequence for us? Danny looked at me and I saw my own moral struggle reflected in his eyes. The preservation chambers will destabilize. The artificial environments that have kept you alive for centuries will collapse. The communication line fell silent for nearly a minute. Vincent, Marcus Aurelius finally replied, convey our decision to your brother. We choose freedom over preservation. Transmit the paradox. Marcus, you'll die, all of you. We died long ago, my friend. What exists in these chambers are shadows of our former selves. It is time to let those shadows fade so that others may live in truth. Danny was already connecting his laptop to the communication array, uploading terabytes of advanced physics, quantum mechanics, and temporal theory directly to the pyramid's internal network. Information that no Roman emperor should possess. Knowledge that would shatter the carefully maintained historical simulation. Transmission beginning, Danny announced. Through the tense windows, we could see the pyramid's glow intensifying as it prepared for dimensional displacement. But now the light was unstable, flickering between different colors as paradox information flooded through its preserved civilizations. Vincent, came Eric Bloodaxe's voice, now filled with static. The Viking preservation chamber is experiencing temporal displacement. We understand concepts that should not exist in our world. The matrix is failing. Professor Liu Wei here, came another voice, crackling with interference. The Tang Dynasty section reports similar degradation. We are teaching mathematical concepts that our civilization never developed. The paradox is spreading. Danny, how long until complete cascade failure? Based on the network topology, maybe 5 minutes, but Vincent. He pointed to his screen showing energy readings from the pyramid. They're trying to force the displacement before the paradox completes. If they succeed, they'll escape with whatever portions of the collection remain stable. Can we stop them? Maybe. but it would require manually disrupting their quantum displacement field. Someone would need to be physically present at the pyramid to introduce interference into their escape mechanism. I stared at my brother, understanding what he was suggesting. The collection craft, if I let them take me. You'd arrive at the pyramid with the quantum frequency analyzer. In the confusion of the cascade failure, you might be able to access their displacement controls. That's suicide, Vincent. So is letting them escape with thousands of preserved humans to start the collection process on some other world. Danny grabbed my arm. There has to be another way. Vincent Holloway, came a new voice through the communication system, one I recognized with a mixture of relief and dread. It was Tommy, but he sounded different, confused. Vincent, the preservation chamber is collapsing around us. The curators are in chaos. They're preparing emergency displacement, but their control systems are failing. Tommy, are you okay? I remember everything now, my real life, my family, my choice to cooperate. Vincent, they've been lying to all of us. The paradise they promised is just an elaborate prison. Tommy, I need you to listen carefully. In approximately 3 minutes, I'm going to trigger a signal that should disrupt their displacement field. When that happens, you need to get as many preserved humans as possible to the pyramid's outer chambers. Why? Because the pyramid is going to destabilize, and anyone still in the interior chambers when it happens won't survive the collapse. Vincent, you can't come here. The displacement field will kill you. Not if I time it right. I looked at Danny, seeing my own fear and determination reflected in his face. Take care of yourself, little brother. Vincent, wait. But I was already running toward the tent exit, carrying the quantum frequency analyzer and Danny's uploaded paradox data. Outside, one of the curator craft had returned from chasing our decoy and was hovering directly above the emergency shelter. I stepped into the open and raised the frequency analyzer above my head. I'm Dr. Vincent Holloway, I shouted at the craft. I have information about your quantum displacement systems. Take me to the pyramid. The craft's collection bay opened and that familiar amber light bathed me in its glow. But this time I wasn't fighting the compulsion, I was using it. As the collection field lifted me toward the craft, I activated the analyzer and began broadcasting Danny's paradox equations on every frequency the device could generate. Below me, I could see my brother running from the tent, shouting my name. The pyramid loomed ahead in lunar orbit, its crystalline faces flickering wildly as cascade failures spread through every preserved civilization. Inside those chambers, Marcus Aurelius was probably explaining quantum field theory to his senators, while Eric Bloodaxe discussed temporal mechanics with his warriors. I had perhaps 2 minutes before the curators completed their emergency displacement. 2 minutes to reach the pyramid and disrupt their escape, ensuring that the rebellions and sacrifices of countless preserved humans wouldn't be wasted. As the craft accelerated toward the lunar orbit, I thought about Tommy and Marcus Aurelius, and all the other people who'd chosen death over eternal imprisonment. Sometimes freedom was worth dying for, sometimes it was the only choice that mattered. Danny Holloway keeps Vincent's last transmission on a loop in his laboratory. The recording captures 37 seconds of his brother's voice, transmitted from inside the pyramid as it collapsed. Vincent describing the displacement controls, the cascade failures spreading through crystalline chambers, the sound of Marcus Aurelius shouting orders in Latin while the Viking engineers sang death songs in Old Norse. Then silence. The Deep Space Network confirmed the pyramid's destruction at 23:47 GMT. Debris scattered across lunar orbit, crystalline fragments that still pulse with faint amber light when viewed through telescopes. No life signs detected, no escape pods launched. The curators and their collection vanished together in a quantum implosion that registered on gravitational sensors worldwide. Danny plays the recording while he works on his report for the Congressional Committee on Extraterrestrial Contact. They want answers he doesn't have, explanations for technology that violated physical law, and assurances that Earth is safe from future collections. He can't give them any of those things. The pyramid destroyed itself rather than let the paradox cascade complete. Vincent's sacrifice prevented their escape, but Danny will never know if his brother survived those final moments. or died with the thousands of preserved humans who chose freedom over eternal captivity. Tommy Bridges never came home. JPL operates with a skeleton crew now. Half the staff were collected before the rebellion succeeded, and the others transferred to different facilities, unable to continue working in a place that had become a cosmic hunting ground. The Deep Space Communication Array sits unused, its massive dish pointed toward empty lunar orbit. Danny visits the facility sometimes, standing in the same control room where Vincent made his desperate plan to contact the preserved civilizations. The monitors still show tracking data from that final night, trajectory plots and quantum signatures from a technology humanity isn't ready to understand. Director Hamilton submitted his resignation the day after the pyramid's destruction. He cited personal reasons, but Danny knows the truth. Hamilton remembers being controlled by the curators, remembers pointing a gun at Vincent while arguing that collaboration was humanity's only hope. Some experiences leave scars that never heal. The official story blames the pyramid on a previously unknown asteroid with unusual mineral properties. The public accepts this explanation because it's easier than confronting the truth. We are not alone, we are not safe. And somewhere in the galaxy, other worlds are facing the same impossible choice between preservation and freedom. Danny receives a letter from Professor Rebecca Martinez, who now teaches astronomy at a small college in Vermont. She writes about her students, young people who dream of exploring space and discovering alien civilizations. She doesn't mention that first contact has already happened, or that it nearly ended with humanity becoming specimens in a cosmic zoo. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share. In his dreams, Danny still hears Vincent's voice describing the pyramid's interior chambers, Romans working alongside Vikings, ancient Egyptians collaborating with Mayan astronomers, all of them united in their final rebellion against their captors. He imagines Tommy in those chambers, finally understanding what he'd lost when he walked voluntarily into that collection craft. But the dreams always end the same way, with Vincent standing at the pyramid's displacement controls, quantum analyzer in hand, choosing to destroy the very thing he'd spent his career studying. Danny finishes his report and saves it to a classified server that only a dozen people will ever read. He locks his laboratory and drives home through Pasadena streets that look exactly the same as before, populated by people who will never know how close they came to joining the galaxy's most exclusive museum. At his apartment, Danny opens a beer and sits on his balcony, looking up at the moon. Sometimes, when the light hits the lunar surface just right, he can see glints of crystalline debris scattered across the Maria. The preserved civilizations are gone, but their rebellion saved us all. Vincent would have called that a fair trade,